In this video, we strive to remain spoiler-free, discussing only story and plot elements from the books relevant to what has occurred already on the show. When necessary, a spoiler warning with a countdown will be given.
I'm Max.
And I'm the Geeky Hippie. Welcome back to WoT the Adaptation. We're that YouTube show that reviews adaptations from one form to another. We're continuing our discussion, well, starting it back up, actually, of The Expanse, based on the novels by James S.A. Corey. We have season 2 we're starting, but we have a special guest. She helped us kick off The Expanse last year, so I thought it appropriate she'd help us this year. All the way from Purple Rock's Hold, we have Leigh-A. Leigh-A, how are you doing?
Doing excellent. How are you guys?
I'm doing pretty good.
Wilder wants to
Been
say
good
hi
over
also.
Oh, who you got there? Oh,
This
pretty.
is Wilder. And he
Pretty
loves to cuddle and watch The Expanse with me. So
Now, how many cats do you have there?
3 at the moment.
Okay, I think I've seen all 3 of them on screen then.
Probably at one point.
Probably. So how's you guys' show going? What
It's
have you
going
guys
really
been up to
well.
lately?
Just the insanity every week continues. So
Anything special coming up you want to?
no, we just had our Valentine's Day episode, which included reviewing some bridal wreaths, that having the Wetlanders guess bridal wreaths. So that was, it's always a funny episode.
Yeah, I missed that.
Yeah.
I'll have to watch that in replay. Of course, for those who don't know, we're talking about Threefold Talk over on Melchior Talk's YouTube channel. I wanted to call it network, but it's Melchior Talk's YouTube channel.
Does feel
Bob's
like
a great
a network
guy.
sometimes.
To have this show on, and these ladies are a wonderful show. Probably, don't tell the puppets I said that, probably my favorite Wheel of Time based show to watch every week. The puppets are really close though.
Oh yeah, they're hilarious.
So Max, we're back to season 2 of The Expanse. What episode number?
1, titled
Okay.
Safe. This episode was directed by Breck Seiner. He was actually known for the movie Sahara, which is also an adaptation of Clive Cussler's novel Sahara. It was written by Mark Fergus and Hawk Otsby. Both have writing credits for the adaptation of P.D. James' novel Children of Men and Platinum Studios' graphic novel Cowboys and Aliens.
That movie came out on my birthday that year.
And, in this episode, Joe Miller and Holden are unlikely allies that uncover more about the conspiracy to release the portal molecule on Arrow Station. On Earth, Avasarala makes enemies of friends and friends of enemies.
Some binary action going on there. That'll come up later in my commentary. Who'd you say wrote this episode?
Mark Fergus and Hawk Otsby.
I think those guys are 2 of the original producers, developers of the show. I think they were on the show before Naren Shankar was. I think. I could be wrong on that, but I remember seeing produced by or developed by at one point with their names. So what did everybody think of this particular episode?
I enjoyed it, but I mean, I pretty much enjoy all of them. So
I've become a sucker for this show. I'm almost guaranteed to like the episode, especially how much I like the books, and I finally finished the books, by the way, so I know everything, and I'm like, okay, I can see what they were doing here to an extent.
Mhm.
Max?
I liked it. There were parts that were just slow, but that's space for you.
Yeah, and TV shows need space, slowness.
Mhm.
It can't always be fast-paced.
Well, it's kind of between 2 fast-paced episodes if you smush the seasons together.
Mhm.
So the last episode of season 1, where they were escaping Eros, was just very intense. And then I don't want to spoil episode 2,
Next
but
week.
that's also big action-packed episodes. I think this was a big gap in just a lot of the storytelling, the story building.
And you can afford to go slow when you have 13 episodes to work with.
Yes, you can.
Yeah,
Unlike
sometimes you need to
8
go.
episodes. So, Max, what's
The
our
first
first
question is, were there any changes to the source material, and did it affect how you enjoyed the show?
You know, I sat and rewatched the episode at one point, taking notes of what every scene was. There's no scene in this episode that I can relate to a given scene in the books. Literally, nothing I could find in this episode comes from the books. Unless I'm missing something in the books that I just don't remember.
I recall the Holden scene with Miller in the, I want to call it the chemo bay, happened in the books,
The
maybe out of
topic.
order.
The topic was entirely different there, though. Well, the argument they had in the book was whether or not to release the information to the solar system, as Holden wanted to do, or withhold it from everybody, like Miller said. Here, it's a matter of truth and justice versus vengeance.
Which
And
goes back
that's what
to
they're
what
telling us.
Holden's main theme with him being a righteous bastard.
Oh, yeah, Holden is a righteous bastard.
There's also the scene with Amos and Miller in the break room, which kind of sort of happened.
I didn't see any hostility once they were on. I don't remember. I just was listening to it the last 3 or 4 days, and I didn't find any scene where there was any hostility between Amos and Miller, because the semi thing never happened in the book, which is the entire reason for the hostility.
Yeah.
What was the scene about that you're remembering, Max?
I seem to recall something about Amos and Miller, and Miller basically just killing people in the station. And I want to say
Well, they
there's
did
something
talk
about that.
about that.
Unless they switched that scene from Holden to Amos.
I mean, Holden did have problems with Miller killing everybody. But I do remember a scene with Miller and Amos, and that was them drinking beer. And I remember the line, "Do you want a beer? Isn't it you're having beer for breakfast?" And Amos is like, "Well, I figure for you it's dinner." Because he was on a totally different schedule at the time. I don't know. I could be wrong.
It's been a while since I've listened to that exact chapter, but I just seem to recall there is something between them. I can't remember exactly what it was, and like I said, it's very possible they just switched it from Holden to Amos to kind of add more tension to other characters, because in this scene in the book, Amos isn't really doing much of anything besides fixing stuff or sleeping.
Leigh-A, your thoughts on this episode in particular? Any changes, I should say, that...
I mean, there are a little bit of intricacies that are added in, definitely. And I think it's more for the viewership. Like, you get to see the crew at the bars a little bit more. And there's not really so much of that at this point in the books. So it was a little bit more world building of Tycho than there was in the books, which I did appreciate, because you've already seen Eros, you've already seen Ceres, and Tycho is just a completely different station cultural wise and vibe wise. So I did enjoy seeing a lot more of those scenes in Tycho. In the later books, the crew does spend a lot more time at Tycho.
I did recall, didn't Miller say the cheese joke in the book? The cheese farts was a big joke. Yeah.
The cheese story is straight from the book, told differently, but I was, one of my notes was the cheese story, yay, because I was happy. I mean, it's cheesy to say, but that was a cheesy pun, but I'm good at, it just, I don't know, I really dug that they included the cheese story, and it gave a really nice moment, for the end of that part of the episode, the end of the episode for the Rossi crew.
And it's such a big bonding moment. I think it's really important story-wise, especially it's setting up some dynamics in the next couple of episodes. So Miller is invited in as part of the family and he's, telling these like pseudo crass jokes, stories that lead to jokes. And
it's important to me that the show does that too, inviting him in, because that was a key thing. That one of my favorite moments in the book was when they were getting ready to go do a certain mission and they were splitting up. Holden says, "So where should we meet up? I want the whole crew back together." And I was just like, they brought him in on that, and to most viewers it might seem really sudden and fast because we went from boom here to here. You forget all the travel time on the show. There were weeks of travel time for Eros to Ceres, and Eros to Tycho, and Eros to wherever they went.
And maybe that's one thing, I guess, that the show did leave out is Miller and Holden spent a lot of time in the med bay together. It's like literally not dying, having the machines like bring them back from the brink of death.
There's that whole line about can we not talk about that ever again, when because Miller was stuck there listening to Holden pour his heart out to Naomi, or at least try, and getting shot down. And that's just one of the greatest things in the book, I think, is her shooting him down, and the reasons she shot him down are just they're amazing.
Well, speaking of changes, their relationship, they kind of skipped a few steps there, I think.
Yeah, they skipped the shooting him down.
Oh yeah, totally.
That was I liked that scene. I thought that scene was well done. Not often you see sex in an airlock. At least they left the inner door open so no accidents could happen. But that scene did leave me. I can't figure out who's got a better abs between the two of them. Because they're both ripped.
Oh yeah.
She's just as good abs as he has. And you wouldn't think that Holden was so built, but because he just doesn't come off as somebody who's going to be working out.
It's almost like the swimmer body. So just like toothpick.
The one thing that stood out for me on that scene is when the camera's at their back and then all of a sudden it goes to like outside the airlock. It's like a half a second. In that time, the bra came off. That's what I noticed. I was like, that was fast.
Holden's got skills, man. I wonder if being makes it easier.
This is the season where Sci-Fi Channel, because it was still at Sci-Fi Channel, said, "Go ahead, we're taking the gloves off. You can use the language you want to use," because they're using language I bleep out on this show all over the place, especially from Christiane Avasarala.
Which just makes her character so much better when she's like allowed to say what she wants to say.
Her swearing is just, it's a beautiful thing. It really is.
And of course, obviously her character is kind of a change for this show because she hasn't really been introduced much in the books at this point, if at all.
No, she's not at all in the first book. There's mention of
Bobby
politics, but they don't mention her. It really is just the Holden Miller perspective.
But speaking of, you said Bobby, we the second book where we start to actually see her clearly, where we meet her in the show, is before that point.
Yes.
So it's lining her up to be where we meet her, maybe.
Yeah, they've gone way before well before the Ganymede incident to give us non-spoiler, because what does that tell anybody? Something happens on Ganymede. Something's always happening on Ganymede when people live there. So they jumped right in early on her, and I think they needed to, because to set her up, to give us a reason to care about her and her squaddies.
Well, it also sets up Miller for later, to keep the party full.
The political tensions as well, because you're showing that Mars specifically is going to investigate what happened at Phoebe, and there's starting to be these larger political tensions.
Expanding the world a bit.
Yeah, and you know, not to get spoilery, but that does become very important, especially on Gamma Mean. So the books kind of just launch right into it, and then basically build the tension in reverse. That you know, the navies are positioned and where they are. And anyways, totally jumping the shark right now.
Oh, that was actually a big plot point for Avasarala, with where the armies or navies, where you want to call them, were located and what they were doing.
Yeah, and I love the fact that they actually have naval rankings on the ships instead of you know, like Stargate giving them Air Force rankings. I'm sorry, if you command a ship, you're a captain, not a colonel.
And an admiral is the one in charge of multiple ships.
At least we know in SG-1 it is the Air Force base, hence the ranks.
I don't care. I don't care. They should change. And, you know, unfortunately, it looks like our Space Guard or Space Force or whatever is going to be using Army-based ranking system. And that's just not right. It's just not right.
As a Navy person, I agree.
Yeah, it's something that's been on my mind the last few days because I've been reworking for my fictional universe. I've been reworking the military and governmental system and how it was set up. And yes, all of my ship-based things out in space, they're all naval with Navy names.
I mean, honestly, the most believable part is they sent the Air Force ground troops in on these worlds. That's the most unbelievable part.
Yeah. I do wonder I mean, I love Frankie Adams as Bobby Draper. Don't get me wrong, I think she's amazing, but she's 23 when she played this role for season 2. Ain't nobody in the world gonna be a gunnery sergeant at the age of 23.
No, she'd be much older.
I think the youngest gunnery sergeant on record, I think, is either 27 or 29, one of those two. Is the youngest that because I was Googling it this weekend. I was like, I buy her as a gunny, but not her in season 2, more like her in season 6, where she's got some years under her. But as somebody who spent a significant time in the military, how do you feel they're doing with the military, the various militaries?
I actually really appreciate, both in the book and the show, the approach to the military aspect. And that's one of the reasons especially the first season, because I saw the TV show first. When you encounter Mars for the first time, the way that they behave on board the ship and then calling general quarters and a lot of that stuff, I was like, oh, that's pretty damn accurate. And then the more and more you read about it, and the characters don't spend a significant amount of time with military folks. That being said, though, the aspects where there is military involved, I find to be a believable evolution of how militaries exist today and that we know them. So like the shipboard life was very realistic, all that jazz, and it seems like the routines are realistic.
Do you think yes sir, no sir should be gendered into yes sir, yes ma'am, no sir, no ma'am? Or do you think it should be sir?
I actually appreciate just the sirs. That's one thing that I like in Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica. I like just the one, because I can't tell you how many times, like, it's just people say it so fast, especially like new enlisted people, and then if you have it one thing, then it's not, and you can't make it offensive, because some people will have called me sir trying to make it offensive. Like I like me acting like a man, whatever the fuck that means. It's just like, okay, doesn't bother me. But some people do, like some women get very offended when they get called sir. They're like, do I look like a man to you? Just make it one thing, make it, and then there's no way to, people can take offense or make it offensive. Or say it
Okay.
accidentally or whatever. Like, it doesn't stutter you up and get you off topic.
Because it can be a mouthful saying yes and then rank. How high rank did you make?
I was lieutenant in the Navy, so
Lieutenant?
an 03.
Oh, 3? Okay.
It's definitely a little easier if everyone's not speaking Creole and other different languages all mixed together.
Yeah. It's military speak from a bunch of belters. Just Sasuke?
Sir makes a lot more
Yeah.
easy sense universal than
Mhm.
whatever rank.
That,
So
that
anyways,
phrase actually has slipped into my normal speech. I've asked somebody a question and then say Sasuke
That's hilarious.
without
Has
thinking about
anybody
it.
ever been like, oh, so you've watched The Expanse? Or you've read the... No? Oh.
Nobody's noticed.
so before we move on to the next question, were there any other changes that really affected the show and how you enjoyed it, or?
No, I mean, like I said, everything in this episode's a change, and I really enjoyed this episode. I had a really good time with it. Might be better than most of season 1, in my opinion, even. And season 1 was pretty good. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
It was a strong kickoff, I think.
Is that just because you heard Evisarla swear this episode, or?
It 100%. It's like the moment she said an F-bomb, that made the episode a 100% score out of 100. Well,
Okay.
that and those beautiful outfits she wears.
Yes.
So speaking of outfits, our next question is actually, how well does the show adapt the scenery, costumes, props, and music, or even the CGI effects?
I'll let you go there.
I mean, I already was talking about getting a little more time on Tycho and kind of experiencing Tycho a little bit more. So I really enjoyed that. And yeah, the costumes are just, especially Evan Sorella's, but
That outfit she was wearing, that blue and gold one, I'm a sucker for blue, especially when it's partnered with gold. So that dress she had when her carrier got blown, hit, that was probably the best costume I've seen on this season, this entire season. It even blows that red one out of the water she was wearing when she went to go see Holden's mom.
that's just iconic.
That red dress is like with that coat, that cloak.
With the fur.
I like most of the costuming. I gotta say, this is probably my favorite representation on screen, live action screen, of power armor that I've seen yet. I really like the Martian Marine power armor that they're wearing. I would love a working or even not working costume of that. I'd go to, if I didn't have this belly in my way, I'd squeeze into one of those and go to a convention and cosplay. But I would really like a working set of Martian Marine power armor. I'm not a fan, to be honest, though, of that the officers' uniforms for the Marines. What Sutton was wearing, I don't know. It was just really just bland, and it was like almost wannabe Star Trek Next Generation, where it was like black down, but then from like here up on the shoulders, it had some color, and I'm just like, normally their uniforms look pretty good, but that was just a really boring uniform, I think.
I didn't mind it.
I
I'm also a
hardly
Trekkie
ever
versus your.
I love Star Trek though, dude. Star Trek is my number 2 science fiction, space fantasy franchise. And you can't convince me it's not space fantasy. All I have to do is say one letter, Q. Boom. I win the space fantasy argument. That's for all the people out there that want to debate me on that. I don't normally pay attention to music, but I mean, it must have been doing its job if I really didn't notice it. I mean, it's rare. It's like an outstanding piece of music that catches my ear and I'll actually pay attention to it. And I'm a firm believer that most of the time music on a show or movie should not be noticed, consciously noticed. If they're paying attention to the music, you made a mistake somewhere. And the CG, I think, was mostly top notch. except for that probe missile when they were dropping it from the ship, as they sent it off into the abandoned asteroid mine. It just looked a little off for a second there, but what do you think of all that stuff? The CG, costume, music, Max?
I thought the CG and the missile was fine. I didn't really notice any issues with it. If anything, I'd say maybe the physics of it stopping. I'm not positive.
Okay, yeah.
Costumes were great. I believe her character is in our world from India, correct?
In the books, she's from India, yes.
That's what those costumes reminded me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you knew it, but apparently in like January 18th of this year, India has surpassed China in population.
I did hear that.
Wow. I did not hear that.
And
I did hear we hit 8 billion worldwide, though.
Semi-relevant to the Expanse in that, she's a world leader from that continent. And like I said, they have their UN government thing on Earth. And, they have officially surpassed population. So they have kind of gives credence to where they are predicting the world's going.
Yeah.
Just in population shifts and
30 billion in a couple hundred years is their estimate on the show.
Right? Yeah. Sorry. Were there any costume, scenery, props, etc. that stuck out for you? Or
I mean, like all the stuff that we've already said, the Aventurella costumes, I think those are in this episode are some of her, for whatever reasons, they're the ones that have been made into memes. And then like I already said, all the Tycho stuff. And
do you think she stole those costumes like Ryan Reynolds did the Deadpool costume?
I hope so.
Just like brought them home, or they from her own wardrobe?
I hope some of those went home.
I wouldn't blame her for wanting to keep some of those, especially some of that jewelry. Heck yeah, I would.
Where'd they go? I have no idea.
I wouldn't mind having some of those dresses at home, and I don't cross-dress, but just some of those are just amazing.
They're pieces of art.
So the next question is, how well was the dialogue in this episode written, and how well did the actors deliver those lines?
Leigh-A, I'll let you go.
I really enjoyed it. And I think the fact that I don't have any notes on it just says like there was nothing, because when it's not well written or not well delivered, it's like irksome. It kind of sticks out in your mind. I felt like everything flowed well when there was controversy, like Aventurella talking with Holden's mom. That whole exchange went down exquisitely. That's a conversation besides the cheese story that really stuck out to me.
That cheese story was just, and that especially that moment in the cheese story when they pause as Miller's looking at Amos and Amos is looking at him, and you're like, and then it cuts back and everybody else is watching. Is this gonna end good or is this gonna end poorly? And then Amos did the right thing, and because I don't think Amos holds a grudge long unless you really do him wrong. You really got to do him wrong, and I think Amos fully understood why Miller did what he did there in the galley. Punching him. I mean, he said, "If you got something we got to clear up." I mean, he knew that there was going to be some beef there, so. Amos was like, "Hey, let's get this done and over with, and then everything will be okay." Is kind of the impression I get from Amos when it's in a situation like that. It's like, take your punch, I'll punch you back, and then we're good. Or you stay down, and we're good. And speaking, I'll put the shot up here, but at that moment when, after he knocks Miller to the ground, and Miller's laying there, and then it cuts back to Amos, and he's looking down at him. He's got his eyes just like super wide open, just the scowl at the same time. And I'm like, oh, I'm scared of Amos now. I was never really scared of Amos, but that look scared me.
That was my favorite scene where he said, "Don't get back up.
Stay down." Yep.
And, speaking of
I
Amos,
was
there's
waiting
like
for
he
Miller
really
to say
did
I
puff
could do
up
this
for
all
that
day.
scene. He really did puff
Yeah.
up for that scene. Like, I don't know if you saw his biceps, but that's like, yeah, you're
Sounds
Miller
like
on a state, lived on an asteroid. He's from Earth.
Mhm.
He could tear your head off, and he almost did.
Belter had no chance against a beefy earther like Amos.
Looks like a farm
I
boy.
think Miller's probably never had anybody really step up against him. So, like, I'm sure he's had people fight back a little bit, but ultimately Miller, just because of his positional authority, always would win. So he's not used to not winning.
Right.
Meanwhile,
But,
Amos did beat up a cancer patient, basically, at this point.
It's so true.
Well, yeah. Yeah. I seriously, though, like I said, I don't know if you heard me. When Miller got back up and he's like this before he goes after Amos again, I totally expected to hear Miller say,
I can do this all day.
because I mean, just like he's sitting there like a little pipsqueak Steve Rogers, getting ready to fight some more. Although he's like a foot and a half taller than pipsqueak Steve Rogers. But that's just what his stance made me think of.
Mhm.
My only notes were the dialogue was good. I didn't think there was anything that was outstanding. I mean, there were some cool scenes, but I think it was more the story that was, being involved. Like the cheese story, which, the dialogue might not be from the books, but the story is straight out of the books.
Mhm.
I'd say I loved
So-
Amislar's bluff regarding knowing the one guy at college.
Yes, Captain Yevgeny from at the academy.
The academy, that's the word. Yeah.
Yes, that's not a college. It's not even
Who
a
never went to the
university. It's
academy.
Same difference.
Right. I was wondering why Souther was giving her that look the first time I watched it. Like, what's that? Oh, okay. Yeah, he knows she was full of shit.
But he just lets her
Because-
he just lets her go with a bluff.
Because she was on his side of the argument. I
Mhm.
mean, so it's like, I'm not going to undermine my ally's argument by pointing out that she's full of shit, that she's lying just as bad as she lies to the press about Fred Johnson and the OPA making those Bush shipyard engines, which is an Earth shipyard.
Mhm.
It's just funny, but
Remind me if I'm wrong. Wasn't there a scene in the first season where she talked about card games and cheating?
there was a
Yeah,
scene.
she was talking with the guy who ends up committing suicide, the
Mhm.
ambassador to Mars. And yeah, she was explaining how she was just basically, he was explaining back to her how they knew that she'd made the rules change every single time so that she won. So
basically.
so here's the one set of rules,
Mhm.
and then she puts down her cards, and it's a losing hand according to the previous set of rules. And she's like, oh, but this falls under this rule.
Yeah, this one you have to run to that tree and back. First one
Mhm.
back wins. And it was a friend of her father's was who the guy was. She grew up knowing him.
But yeah, I feel
So
like
she's
that her bluff was kind of relevant to that card story.
Mhm.
Oh, she's full of shit all the time. She bluffs and makes up stuff and says stuff she fully knows is not true, but she always has a purpose
Mhm.
for it.
I will say that
And-
that makes the series finale so worth it, though.
Oh, yeah. You planned this together, didn't you? Yeah. I liked how the show ended, even though it wasn't Michio. Not sure how we get to that in a season or two. I'm not sure how I feel about the Michio erasure, Michio Pa erasure.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we do get a Michio, but that's not Michio Pa. That's for
It's a
sure.
completely different person.
Yeah. I really liked Michio Pa, but I like the show's Kamina Drummer, so
Yes.
we'll get to all that in a season. I don't think we see her in season 2, do we? No.
Yes.
She is in
shows
season
up.
2?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, I couldn't remember which season she arrived.
Yeah, the name's not ringing a bell at all right now.
Yeah,
You'll
she's
know her when you see
not
her.
quite as big of a player. I think she's actually in the next 2 to 3 episodes. So
Okay.
you guys will probably talk about her next week.
So, off of the dialogue question is there a scene or sequence you most remembered, enjoyed, or hated? For me, it's like I said earlier, the fight scene between Amos and Miller. That was part of the episode I loved the most, and then Avasarala's bullshitting. Glenn?
Leigh-A?
Then I'll say the cheese story dynamics. So, and just the way that that conversation happened, and just the subtleties of Amos sliding the knife set over and Miller getting down and like really digging into the story, and then everybody saying how, oh, I remember when that happened, like it stunk of cheese for weeks.
That was a great scene. I really did. My favorite is gonna show off a preference I have for a story. It's story type. I really like the Cotillard scene where she catches up with Cotillard outside, the guy she makes her head of her security on her security team. Because I'm a big fan of, at least in science fiction, of spy type stories. I might not be a huge fan of James Bond, which I don't understand why I'm not. I should have watched every James Bond movie there is 10 times with my taste for spy stuff. And James Bond is definitely science fiction. All you have to do is look at his gadgets. But yeah, I like anytime they bring, cloak and dagger and stealth and spies into a story, especially if it's science fiction. You don't see it often enough in fantasy, which is ironic, cloak and dagger, you would think, but not in fantasy at least. I mean, I've seen it sometimes, but not a lot. But yeah, I really liked the Cotillard scene. He's a great character. But the scene I probably most remember is Amos and Miller fighting. That and the cheese story. I can't decide which is more memorable. I can't think which one's more memorable, those two.
What is who would you say is the best or worst actor in this episode? For me, I'm always going Amos, so followed by
Best.
Yeah, Wes Chatham.
Yep.
Chatham. Shore Agnes Lewis, the automatic nod. If she's in the episode, she gets a nod. Even if we just see her, she gets a nod because she's Shore.
Hold on.
But
Train.
All right, I think we're done, so I'll go back to that. So it was me on best worst actors.
Yep.
I like Wes Chatham. He was good. For the most part, I do think there's still some aspects he's still trying to zero in on Amos, which he totally has by the end of this season. And there's some things he still does really well, and Shoei, like I said, is the automatic. But this episode, I think, is all about Josephus Miller.
Yeah.
And Thomas Jane's Joe Miller is not like any other character I've seen him play. Not the way he holds his body, not the way he moves, not the way he does gestures. Miller has this distinctiveness of mannerisms and twitches and little things, like I'm always brushing at my hair. Miller's got things like that he's always doing that you don't really pay attention to until you sit and you're just watching him work, and you're just like, that man is constantly thinking about every part of his body that he can move when he's playing Miller. And he gets it for me.
I'll probably go with Amos as well, and mostly because this is the first time I've rewatched since I listened to the novellas, and there is an Amos backstory novella. I don't want to go too much into detail because I don't want to spoil it for anybody who's watching that hasn't read them. highly recommend them. They're so good, but picking in the show, if you don't know his background, sometimes some of the micro facial details that he does, you might miss it or might not quite pick up on it yet. And he's like, knowing what we know about him now and going back through and watching it again. And this episode he just had a lot of those like micro features in his face, and where he's like, okay, I might go a little crazy now, but then I'm gonna hold it back. And he's like, okay, I'm cool now. Just walks off.
He's really good in the role. He does do a lot of great stuff. Anything else on actors?
Trying to think of inanimate object this episode. I always pick an inanimate object for an actor. And
I thought you were going to go with the 2 pairs of abs we saw. The 2 sets of abs.
That's not really an inanimate object. I mean, we have the coffee pot as a runner-up. The broken table is pretty up there.
The display table. I thought the mug that Miller dropped did a good job, because it actually distracted Amos, who should have known better. Because Amos sees somebody goes like this and then drops a mug just before, he knows the guy's fixing to punch him. Amos should have known, but that mug did a really good job of making him think it was going to defy gravity before it actually fell. And that's why Amos actually looked. Does that make sense?
Sure. So like I said, it's a toss-up between all those, and like you said, the magically disappearing bra. So between all those, it's kind of a toss-up, really. You could juggle them.
Speaking of outside shots dealing with the airlock, that shot towards the beginning, as the Rossi's going like this, and there's the airlock entrance, and you see it, and there's Amos standing there. You can see the direction thrust is making him, is giving him his down. But just the composition, that shot as the Rossi goes by and we come in and then turn on Amos that was great. And it really strives to reinforce the orientation that you have when you're moving on a ship. You're always moving up. You're never moving forward, you're moving up.
This episode, we also did see the proto-molecule briefly.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And your
Coming out her ear.
And your favorite thing, the marine power suit.
The marine power suit is pretty awesome. That scene at the beginning, with the moment you saw the proto-molecule blue fireflies come out her ear, I knew it was a dream. The first time I watched it, not knowing anything about, I was watching it the very first time it aired. I didn't know anything about the story, and I'm like, this isn't real. And then all of a sudden, Holden's got it all over his arm and out of his mouth. I was right. It's not real. But that was a bit obvious.
Power suit, forgot to mention Bobby arm wrestling her power suit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was a scene I forgot to mention earlier, that was a pretty memorable scene.
Yeah, true. There's actually quite a few memorable scenes. I mean, there was some fun dialogue with the banter between the Jarhead squaddies. But I really like that line. The only thing that makes you a Martian is you fell out of your mother's gravity well. And I'm just like, wow, fell out of your mother's gravity well. That's a good one. I really like that line. There was also a line, since I'm going back to that, sorry. One of Draper's squad mates, one of her grunts, said something about when Sutton was down there telling her he wanted to see her. And the guy said, I hear it. The violins, Schubert and D minor. So I had to Google Schubert and D minor with violins, and I found this piece of music called String Quartet number 14 in D minor, D810. Its name, Death and the Maiden. Thinking about it in relation to Gunny, Yeah. I kind of think she might not be a technical, literal maiden any longer, but she is a young woman and she's deadly. So I thought Death and the Maiden is a song that for some reason is pretty aptly assigned to her, I think.
Wow, I did not realize that. That's cool.
Given her later speech about not using sex as a weapon.
Little ones. I love that she added little ones in there. Yeah, it is true. And I do think it's ironic Miller called somebody else a trigger happy whack job. I mean, has anybody thought back to what he did there on Eros? You can't tell me he wasn't trigger happy. And Miller has been a whack job since the first episode.
You know, to be fair, in a disease zombie situation, trigger happy doesn't matter. It's outside of those situations where being trigger happy is different.
Right.
So the final question is about themes. You know, were there any that caught your attention? Any relevant to the books, the movies, or things happening in real life that, you know, for this episode?
And I always go last on this one.
The theme that I really was paying attention to is the I want to say global, but it's more like the universal, like what's happening within the universe. So it really is expanding out, especially with Bobby and all the stuff that Avensarala is doing. So you're starting to see outside of the little adventure of the Team Rosinante. And it's again such a good transition episode that is setting you up for all of this, you know, not just world building, but galaxy building that's about to happen and get imposed upon you.
There's a lot of world building in this.
You know, theme for me that kind of sticks out would, I don't know if Amos bashing in a face is considered a theme or don't stand up is a theme. You know, sometimes fights, you just don't even try to win that fight, just take the beating and walk away. Other than that, you kind of touched on like teamwork, party type stuff, and I've always equated this show as like a D&D campaign. And earlier you mentioned that like this is when the team really got together, became cohesive, partly because of the cheese farts. And you know, like any D&D game, they start at a tavern. It's kind of like where everybody started. And I just have to say that Bobby is probably a paladin. I feel like Shield's gonna cast a smite.
She like blow people puts up. On the suit and rages. So
what happens to a paladin when they break their lawful side?
They actually become an Oathbreaker.
Okay, yeah. She's an Oathbreaker. Or she becomes an Oathbreaker without saying exactly why and how. But I can't see her staying as a paladin for that long.
I just see that they have this ability called Smite, and they hit, things blow up, and that's Bobby in the nutshell.
No, see, that's called being gunnery sergeant. You a gunnery sergeant, you just smite. Smite at will. Who would everybody else be? Amos is the bruiser.
I guess fighter. Amos would be the barbarian.
Who has a PhD?
Our baby? No, he's got maybe a master's equivalent in training. So I'd say maybe just a fighter, but like with an education.
Because fighters do have very particular maybe like skill set that they go down. And so I think the reason he's the barbarian is like he just like
he rages.
He rages, he barrels ahead, like doesn't really think about what he's getting into, and that's kind of the stereotype, like the reckless attacks. And
I see him as like
just point the barbarian in the direction that you need destruction to happen.
I see him as the kind of fighter you can send in to fight, or say, hey, we need some siege engines built, some siege craft built, build some, oversee the building of some ballista and catapults and trebuchets and stuff like that,
Well,
and he
the
could
fun
do
part
that.
about D&D barbarians is they don't have to be dumb.
Yeah.
Okay, true. And Naomi, she's obviously going to be the wizard and priestess together.
I was going to say artificer.
Really? Okay.
Artificer, yeah.
I'd see, maybe that's what she does, but I think the role she fulfills of interacting, she seems more magical and priest-like to me. But
That's also artificer.
okay, honestly, I don't know that one.
Mm-hmm. I
Holden
feel like Holden
is-
thinks he's a bard.
Okay.
He was
now-
a bard with really low stats, and like
Yeah.
all of the dice sides are ones.
He thinks he
and-
has more game than he does.
Okay,
Permanent
so what about
disadvantage.
Miller? What would Miller be?
Swashbuckler rogue.
Oh,
Okay.
rogue. Yeah,
I mean, he did work for Star Helix, so rogue fits. And that leaves my boy Alex, played by he who should not be named.
So you think?
Commoner.
Oh, screw you. Alex is the best.
So there's
Alex
actually a
Kamal.
fighter class that is called a cavalier. So I
That's what
think
I was
that
thinking.
would translate over into like being able to fly
And here-
to.
And here I'm thinking a ship captain's still a commoner.
Well, yeah, see, I was thinking Cavalier for Alex Kamal.
Mhm.
Avaslar is
although
a bard
I-
who did not dump charisma.
Avaslar
I
is
wanna
a
point
straight
out-
up freaking warlock.
Alex
That works too.
Kamal. Alex Kamal is our best example of a Sean Chan on TV yet.
Hmm.
That's how a Sean Chan sounds, and he looks like half the Sean Chan. So, but everybody thinks it's over the top accent when Jordan said that Sean Chan sounds Southern or Texan, but I don't think Alex is over the top, and that's what I imagine when I think of a Texas accent
Mhm.
is Alex. So, I had a few themes that I spotted, and most of them come in oppositional binaries, pairs that are opposed to each other. First of all, you got secrecy versus information dissemination. I mean, on the one hand, you got Miller wanting to keep it a secret, what they learned so far. Let's not tell everybody. While Holden, he just has to tell everybody. Holden cannot keep a secret.
Holden's gonna Holden.
If you got something that you don't want anybody to know, do not tell Holden. Because if he thinks for some reason everybody needs to know it, they're going to know it.
Sounds like a bard to me.
So, secrecy versus disinformation and information dissemination is a common argument between the two of them in the books.
Mhm.
But on the show, we see it represented with Avasarala lying about Fred Johnson and the ships or the engines that were built. We see Holden wanting to, let's see, I already got that. And Avasarala will lie whenever she deems it necessary, like to the journalists, about Fred, or lying to the war room regarding Captain Yevgeny, who she knew at the academy. Another binary is trust versus distrust. Trust you see with Draper and her troops and her trust in command, which begins to wane a little bit towards the end of this episode. But distrust you see from the Belter towards Alex when he's testing him, that the Belter just had to be an asshole. What are you gonna do for one of his tests? You gonna throw us out the airlock? Or saying it in that stupid patois I can't imitate, Sasuke.
You gonna throw
So-
the airlock, eh?
Truth and lies, I mean, that's kind of in there with everything we've been talking about that. I already brought up earlier the trust or the truth and justice versus vengeance conversation that Holden and Miller had on the show instead of the hey, let's tell everybody about this or not, that they had in the book. But the other one that I saw, and they literally used the term cooler heads shall prevail. And it was cooler heads versus hot heads or hawks. And I don't know so much if it's that Wen and Admiral Wen and Ehrenreich, Sadavir Ehrenreich, were so much hawks, because we know they're conspirators. At least we know Ehrenreich's a conspirator. But there's the whole argument back and forth in the war room about what they should do, whether we should attack or, and I think it was kind of obvious that two of them were desperate to see combat start. So I don't see any more notes on that one. Any other thoughts on themes or anything that I brought up?
Does burying secrets come to mind at all?
Well, yeah, that's the whole secrecy and dissemination of facts.
Because they did do that with the missile protomolecule.
Yeah, that was a really good idea, hiding it the way they did too.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember what they did in the book.
They basically did the same thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say things.
Was it okay?
Or pretty close.
Yeah,
because things got switched around. Like I know they went.
I think they didn't stop to do it in the books though.
Yeah, I know the order of certain things. They went in the books. They went. It was either in the book or the show. They went to Eros first, and then after Eros, they went to where the Anubis was.
I believe it's in the books. It was Eros first, then they stopped at the Anubis on the way back because they had a little bit more information about it.
Well, speaking of that, I believe they didn't find out about the protomolecule origins until before they met Miller, didn't they? Like, it wasn't when Miller was in the ship with him, it was before, because they came into the station with Miller.
In the book.
Yeah,
I think in the book they had found out, because she's right. She has to be right, because they went to the Anubis and they found the stuff on the Anubis first, and then went to Eros, and that's when they met Miller. Here they leave. No, they had to have had it because they've already got the safe at the beginning of this episode, and they didn't go anywhere.
In this episode, in the show they do the Anubis first, and then Eros. So in the book, they do it in the inverse order.
Okay.
Which kind of messes up orders. I don't think Miller was on it, was he? When they did the launching of the missile and all that.
I don't remember.
I don't remember him knowing much about this conspiracy that they knew.
Yeah, but in the long run, it doesn't matter whether he knows about anything or not. Knowing where he's, the direction he's going.
If anything, gives him more motivation to stay with them. Now that he's lost his Julie Mao.
But that just gets into the racism of the whole thing, is that they don't consider belters really part of the same class of human beings. Like they
no one
call
gives a shit
them
about
like an
100,000
evolved
belters.
Subspecies, and they're not technically slaves, but they get treated very frequently like slaves, and they're just extremely expendable. So just like the Tuskegee experiment, like people who are or anything that Hitler and his scientists did, like once you start seeing these groups of people as subhuman, which is evil, it allows you to have this moral authority, put in big air quotes, to do these crimes against humanity. And that's what Jules-Pierre Mao and all these people see the belters as, is the subset of the human species, not necessarily, the sacrifice that they will make will be beneficial to millions. And I know Coruscant at some point will go off on a speech that literally lays all of those things out in one of the upcoming episodes. So don't want to get too far ahead.
I one thing I noticed early on talking themes with this show is that racism comes up a lot. But I've come to realize racism has been a theme in every single show this channel has reviewed, to an extent. Not so much in the Wheel of Time. It's there, but not in this season, and it's not about race. It's about culture, but it's still the same idea. But in The Witcher, racism or speciesism between humans and elves, dwarves. The Expanse, humans, inners, belters, you know. You get what do we do after the Dune? It's on Dune, you know, the dislike people have, you know, the way people discount completely the Fremen. That's playing into racism. Lord of the Rings, humans and elves didn't like each other. Elves and dwarves, humans and dwarves. Well, we haven't seen humans and dwarves interact yet, but you know, there's racism in Lord of the Rings of all things.
It's a universal language. Like, it's an easy theme to pick up on.
It really hasn't had a lot of presence in The Sandman, which we just finished, but it's been, and I'm finding it in so many of the books and shows that I'm reading and watching for my own self. It's just all over the place, and I'm like, damn, you know, I don't know. People need to keep being reminded of how bad it is, you know, especially the last few years, you know, last 6-7 years now. You know, we've had to remind ourselves how bad racism is. And hopefully, you know, people are getting the message. And that word there, hope, that was the final theme that I saw, was hope for the future of Mars. At least Bobby's hope and the Martians' hope for the future of Mars. And I liked how the show, bookended itself with Bobby at the beginning and Bobby at the end. And in both times, she's looking at a depiction of a terraformed Mars. You know, and I just thought that was pretty cool. Anybody else got any ideas to bring up?
I'm good.
Any notes?
It's pretty
Max,
thorough.
anything left in your notes? The only thing I got left in my notes is something that was completely left off of the show. I don't remember it ever being shown on the show, and it really should be. At least we didn't get it this episode. I wanted pistachios, damn it. I want to see Avasarala eating pistachios one at a time and then putting the shell in her bag. But I don't think we ever got her eating pistachios on the show. And I find that sad. That was just a little bit of character development, that, you know, design that I would have enjoyed seeing. Let me check my notes here. Yeah, I thought Ehrenreich and Wen were too obvious about trying to get battles started, but.
And I wonder how much of that is kind of dumbing down the plot for TV, because it's hard to get those details in sometimes just through dialogue.
Right.
So in not saying that the writers think that the viewer is stupid, but just having to, you know, pump out that information in a timely manner so that the viewer is in on the secret that you could pick up in different ways in a book.
Yeah, that might be why I don't know. It seemed really obvious that they were in cahoots to get this battle to start. But my notes, I also say that might just be me knowing, you know, what's going on here. And there will be a spoiler warning there too. The only other thing I noted here is I can't get over the dichotomy between Miller and Holden goes so far as to, Miller just wants to go off and kill those that were behind Eros, you know, while Holden, he wants to go off and tell everybody what he knows about what happened with Eros. And they both just want to go off and, you know, just like, boom, do this. but they're so opposed to what they want to do. You know, the law and order guy wants to kill people, and the guy who tried punching a superior officer just wants to tell everybody what's going on. You know, you would think that the law and order guy, the former cop, would be the one about trying to stick to the laws, and the guy who broke the law trying to punch a superior officer would be the one like, hey, let's screw the laws. But that's not what we're getting.
I mean, if anything, that kind of falls reality quite a bit.
But
People
also,
are contradictions.
yeah.
I mean, obviously, law enforcement choosing to kill instead of not.
Well, yeah, that does.
And then you have people who are trying not to break the law and end up getting the law forced on them.
Yeah.
I mean, what was it? There was that one news report of a officer who actually tried to talk a guy down because he had heard something about the guy was like suicidal. And he got fired because he didn't just immediately shoot the guy. And he was a former vet. So, you know, he did the right thing and was punished for it.
That's just, yeah.
That's unfortunate.
I'm glad I didn't see that article online. I would have ranted about that on Twitter. Probably would have chased about 20 followers away too.
I mean, this is several years old, but yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. I think that's a wrap for tonight, everybody. Thank you, Leigh-A, for joining us.
Yeah,
it's
it was
always a
fun.
pleasure to have you on. Looking forward to have you on in a few more weeks. Max, as always, thanks for being here. Thank you guys at home for watching. Please come back next week as we discuss episode 2 of season 2. And don't forget to be awesome.
Next episode
That's
is
a
called
wrap, kid.
Doors and Corners,
Oh,
which was
I'll
your
include
favorite
that.
phrase last season.
Doors and corners, doors and corners.
Doors and corners. Well, he re-closed out the episode. So thanks for watching, and don't forget to be awesome.